And thank you so much to everyone who's been able to join us this evening. My name is Dorothea Lance. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with PWSA USA. I am extremely excited to be joined today, or this evening, or this afternoon, depending on where you are, by Anne and Dave from Harmony. And we are going to be discussing the Tempo clinical trial now, the phase 3 clinical trial for pitolisant. And I think with that, I'm not sure who's going to kick it off, David or Anne. Anne, are you going to kick it off?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And thank you so much. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Adey. I'm a Director of Clinical Operations at Harmony Biosciences, and I'm joined by Dr. Dave Seiden, who is our Senior Medical Director at Harmony. And we're going to talk today about Tempo, our phase 3 pitolisant trial for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Um, and we are also going to spend a little bit of time on we've added an at-home only option in addition to our other sites that we have open. So we'll talk a bit about that today. So to start off with, this is our phase 3. It's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled efficacy and safety study of pitolisant that is followed by an open label extension in patients with PWS. Just a little bit about Harmony. At Harmony, we specialize in developing and delivering treatments for rare neurological diseases that others often overlook. So we believe that where empathy and innovation meet, a better life can begin for people living with neurological diseases. That's our mission. And then I'll talk a little bit about what is a clinical trial. So a clinical trial, it can be called a trial or a clinical research study. We conduct these to learn whether an investigational medication is safe and effective for use in people with whatever medical condition is being studied in that clinical trial. Clinical trials and studies are required to follow strict scientific standards to help ensure the safety of the participants while we learn more about the investigational medication. And then an investigational medication is the substance that's being tested in the clinical studies. And we have ethics committees, or hospitals and doctors' offices have ethics committees that review a clinical study for testing in people to make sure that the investigational medication we're going to use, that the study is in good order, and that investigational medication, the reason it's called that is because it may or may not be approved by the FDA for the treatment that we're studying. So in this case, pitolisant, we're studying it. It is not approved for use in people with PWS. It does happen to be approved for use in other indications, but this is why it's a clinical trial for people with PWS, because it's not approved by the FDA. And then I'm going to hand it over to Dave to talk more about pitolisant and the study itself.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Just as Anne said, I'm the medical director at Harmony Biosciences. I'm actually a neurologist by training and a sleep specialist as well. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Prader-Willi syndrome and pitolisant. So as many of you, of course, know, Prader-Willi syndrome is essentially a disorder of the hypothalamus, where the hypothalamus, which is a specific part of the brain, is not functioning the way it should be. And as a result, because that part of the brain is responsible for many critical functions, like hunger, satiety, sleep wake states, growth hormone secretion, other endocrine functions, because it's not this hypothalamus is not functioning well, This is sort of the basis of many of the symptoms, of course, that people with Prader-Willi syndrome experience. And one of the main functions of the hypothalamus is actually regulating sleep-wake stability. And it's done through a variety of hormones and neurotransmitters that are secreted by the hypothalamus. And two very important ones are something called hypocretin, also known as orexin, and histamine. There are others like serotonin and dopamine and some norepinephrine, things you've heard of. But two important ones are hypocretin and histamine. And what both of these do, including histamine, is that they help promote a state of wakefulness. And the way this system works is sort of interesting. When neurotransmitters like histamine and orexin are functioning, they're sending signals to certain parts of the brain to keep us awake. At the same time, they're sending signals to the parts of the brain that produce the sleep hormones, like GABA, for example. You've probably heard of that one. And conversely, when we are asleep, GABA is sending its signals to the brain to keep us asleep, and also sending signals back to histamine and hypocretin to keep them at bay so they're not working and keeping you awake. So it's kind of an interesting sort of teeter-totter system going on, 24 hours. And we're at Harmony, of course, we have a product called pitolisant, which basically increases histamine levels in the brain. And we're studying it in PWS now, as Anne pointed out. It is approved for people who have narcolepsy, but we're studying it now to see if it will be safe and effective for people with Prader-Willi syndrome who have excessive daytime sleepiness and would need a wake-promoting agent like pitolisant. Next slide. So, the question is, how did we get here? This big phase 3 trial, which we're going to tell you about in a minute, called the TEMPO trial. How we got to this point is through some earlier work that we did, specifically something called a phase 2 trial. So a phase 2 trial is basically where you obtain sort of preliminary data on the safety and efficacy of a particular drug in the people who have the medical condition that you're interested in. It's generally a smaller group of patients in this kind of trial. It's also known as a signal detection study or a proof of concept study. You've probably heard those terms. And that's just what we're looking for. We're looking for a signal. In other words, does the drug do what we think it's supposed to do? Number one. And number two, is it safe? Or maybe we should say, number one, is it safe? And number two, is it doing what we're doing, what we expect it to do? So in the phase 2 trial that we did in people with Prader-Willi syndrome, in fact, it did show a positive signal, and things were moving in the direction that gave Harmony enough confidence to sort of move forward with this larger phase 3 TEMPO clinical trial, which I'll tell you about next. So I'm going to tell you, as I said, about the TEMPO study. We'll talk a little bit about the objectives, some inclusion and exclusion criteria, not a complete list, but just some of the more important ones, and a few study highlights. And then I'll turn it over to Anne, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the clinical trial sites. So next slide, please. So the primary objective of the TEMPO study, this larger phase 3 study, is to evaluate the impact of pitolisant in treating excessive daytime sleepiness, EDS we call it, in people with Prader-Willi syndrome. In addition to this primary objective, we have certain number of secondary objectives where we'll be looking at the severity of irritability to see if this medication improves that particular symptom. the severity of disruptive behaviors. Again, if pitolisant is helping in those specific domains, and whether or not pitolisant will have any improvement in hyperphagia as well. Next slide. So a few of the selected key inclusion criteria. You have to be 6 years old at the time of screening. You need to have a genetically confirmed diagnosis of PWS. It doesn't make a difference which particular genetic issue there is, because there are several that have been associated with, with the PWS phenotype. As long as we have a confirmed diagnosis with a genetic test. And by the way, we can also confirm that for you if necessary, but if it's already been done and there's a record of that, that will be sufficient for us. And of course, you have to have excessive daytime sleepiness to enter the trial. That's the main focus of what we're looking at. And most patients with Prader-Willi syndrome do experience some degree of sleepiness, but not all. So that needs to be part of the syndrome. And you have to have there has to be a consistent parent/caregiver involved in the trial, preferably the same person throughout the study. Next slide. Some of the exclusion criteria include, having previously taken pitolisant, because that could introduce some bias, of course, into the study. We want patients to be experiencing sleepiness related to their Prader-Willi syndrome and not some other disorder like sleep apnea or narcolepsy, for that matter. You cannot participate in another research study and if you have previously been involved in another trial, you need to wait 30 days before you can come into our trial. You need to be on a stable dose of medication. Many drugs are allowed as long as you're on a stable dose. There are a few that would be prohibited, but that's something you would discuss with the principal investigator at the site. And of course, we want you, as I said, we want you to be, we want patients who are sleepy relating to their Prader-Willi syndrome and not related to some other disorder or to insufficient sleep. So in other words, we don't want someone who's chronically walking around sleep deprived, because that could be a reason for their sleepiness as opposed to the Prader-Willi syndrome. So that's just something we need to be concerned with. Next slide. So we've got approximately 134 people coming into the study. This is a global study. About half, give or take, will be coming from the United States. Again, there needs to be an active caregiver participating in the trial. And the overall study participation is expected to be between 4 to 6 months. And there is an option to continue on in an open label extension for a year after that, if you're eligible and if you're interested. Next slide. And this basically just shows a schematic of the study design. You can see there's a screening period, which can be up to 45 days, but doesn't necessarily have to be that long. If we can collect all the information we need in less than that, that's fine. And then we determine whether you're eligible for the trial. And then the study treatment period begins. We call this the double-blind part of the trial, because the patient and caregiver don't know what they're getting, and neither does the investigator. So everyone's blinded, and you're randomly assigned to either pitolisant or placebo, and that goes on for 11 weeks. And then that's followed by an open label extension if the person is eligible and interested, and that's for a year. And then there's a follow-up period after that, a brief follow-up period. And the next slide just gives you a little more detail about this treatment period, the double blind, what we call the double blind treatment period. A little different from the phase 2 proof of concept signal detection study, whatever you want to call it. That's a little different from the tempo study, is that we're actually basing the dose on the person's weight, not their age. And then after patients have been screened, they'll get their first day of study drug on day 1, and that will continue for 77 days, 11 weeks. There is a telehealth visit about 3 weeks in, and then a few in-person visits. You can see at day 29, day 57, day 77. We try to not have too many visits, not to make it too onerous on the patient and their family and caregiver. And then at the end of the double-blind treatment period, again, if you're eligible and interested in participating in the 52-week extension, that is available to you. And then there's some follow-up, as I mentioned previously. So with that, I will hand it back over to Anne, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the sites involved.
Okay.
And then unless there's something I missed, was there anything that
I don't think you missed anything. It is good to mention that for the study, the travel costs are covered by Harmony. Again, to make it less of a burden, we want to make sure that the participant and the caregiver can get to the sites and not get stuck with, paying for that. So we do offer that for travel purposes. So from that perspective, in the US, we have the cities and states where we are running the trial listed here. And then we also have added Science 37, which is a company that does at-home virtual, it's a virtual site. So instead of going to a doctor's office, the visits that require blood draws and ECGs and things that you have to do in person, they do this virtually, meaning that the doctor, our investigator for the study, only sees you via telehealth, but a nurse comes to the house and does the things where they have to touch you, the ECGs and the labs, and we'll talk about that. But here are the sites that we currently have available who are running the trials. Some of these sites you probably know because they are, outside of being principal investigators in our trial, they are doctors who see people with PWS oftentimes. In some cases, they are just clinical research sites. And then again, we have our Science 37, which is not a PWS expert site, but it is the virtual site where you will be seen by that doctor. And then let me move on to, and we'll answer all questions after we get through these slides. So here is sort of more detail about that at-home trial option. The investigator is Dr. Sarah Trepanier. There are multiple study coordinators, but our main study coordinator is Teresa Logsden. And for those of you who are interested, after I go through these details in this at-home option, the email address, if you're interested, is this Harmony PWS at science37.com. And there's a phone number there that you can leave a message and they'll get back to you. And then it really is I don't want to confuse it between our other sites who you do go to the site. There are telehealth visits in our trial. So for those of you who say go to Dr. Khanna at Lurie Children's, there are in-person visits where you go to that hospital to see Dr. Khanna and her team. And then throughout the study, if you're a patient at that site, you also have a few telehealth visits. Not to be confused with this study where it's all at home. So there are telehealth visits that don't require, oh my God, my cat has joined the teleconference because she always does. So there are the regular telehealth visits for Dr. Trepanier and her team. But then when it comes to those in-person visits, instead of it being at a doctor's office, it's in your home. The study nurse who is trained, it's a Science 37 employee, comes to your house, draws labs, prepares the labs to be shipped out from there. Drug is shipped directly from a depot to your home. So there's no travel involved if you sign up for Dr. Trepanier's site with Science 37. And so there's a QR code here that she's going to get mad at me, but I'm going to put her out of the way. There's a QR code that goes to our US website directly to the frequently asked questions tab related to at home, the at home option. And then there's a QR code at the beginning of this presentation and on the last slide that just takes you to the US website. And then you can look around and see all the sites that we do have participating in the trial, as well as the information about this at home option. And I think I mentioned everything. The one thing about the at-home option is it is not available in Alaska or Hawaii, the continental US, because of sometimes it's staffing issues. With Hawaii, it's an issue where you can't have a telehealth visit with a doctor who you haven't met in person. So there are just certain rules that don't allow it to work in Hawaii. And then in Alaska, I think it's more about staffing. And then here's the QR code just to get to the US website. And then again, I'm Ann 80, and the email clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com is where you can ask us directly about the TEMPO study or the pitolisant PWS Harmony study. And then there's also, many of you may know Rachel Radomski, who works in patient advocacy at Harmony. So her information is there as well. But that's the last slide. We can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you,
Sure.
Dr. Seiden. We do have quite a few questions, and I've been getting some folks texting me some questions. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm just going to go ahead and start going through them. Is that okay?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, we will start at the beginning and work our way backwards. Okay, it's a comment and a question. My son is in the early process of being assessed for eligibility in the TEMPO trial at home. We've been working with the folks from Science 37 for a little over a month, and those interactions have been great. Lots of information and appointments are being scheduled promptly. We're encouraged about the process, even though we're not sure if he's eligible yet. My question is, what's the typical timeline from the end of the formal trial to getting pitolisant in the open label period?
You want to answer that, Anne?
So if I'm understanding correctly, because there's a couple of things I want to mention, and then make sure that I answer the question, is so Science 37 just got up and running, and participants are just starting to screen at Science 37. So some of you may have reached out to them and then not heard anything because until they had IRB approval or that ethics approval that I was talking about earlier in clinical trials, they didn't reach out to anyone. So apologies if there was any sort of delay in outreach, and then realize that they are just starting up. So some of the visits may be longer until they get, their stride, as with any site, a brick and mortar site or a virtual site. It takes a while to get, to get yourself familiar with the trial. But I appreciate the kind words about the good experience that you had. For the open label extension, there's two different pieces to that. So there's our double-blind trial that lasts, the 11 weeks, and then the 1-year open label extension. And that happens immediately. So between the double-blind trial, day 77, on day 78, you start the open label extension for a year. In the US and in the US only, because we're the US licensee of pitolisant, we have just started an open label extension study for people who finish that 1 year of pitolisant. And I think that might be what your question is about, is like, how long does it take to get into that trial that didn't exist? We just created it. And so we are just getting up and running with that open label extension. And there shouldn't be any delay between finishing the open label extension for Tempo and what we call our 314 open label extension study that just goes for a longer period of time. We're hoping it would go until we, get the study completed and have a successful study, or, we don't know, right, if this study will work, but it would go on until we determine that it won't go on any longer. That's a new study. It just got approved. And so for people who are just looking to join Tempo, there shouldn't be any gap between those two studies. For those of you who might be in Tempo now, who are coming off this week, the study is just starting this week. So it's there might be a few days gap.
Okay.
Long
that makes
answer,
sense in
but
my
I
brain.
hope I answered what they were asking.
It makes sense in my brain. If it doesn't make sense in the brains of those of you listening, just please, and for the person who asked the question, please feel free to do put in a
email.
follow-up question or
Yeah.
send an email.
You can email me.
But it makes sense to me, Anne. Okay, moving on to the next question. We had a hiccup with medical records process for my loved one. One of the physician practices that received a request for records called them because they were concerned that it was they were concerned the records request was a scam. So there was no clear statement that this was a clinical trial request and no clear notification of who it was coming from. And the physician's name was listed, but there was a California address, and this person lives on the East Coast, so it didn't make sense to them. And this community member is just sharing this so that you are aware that there might be a problem, or that physicians might be a little fishy. So maybe a little bit more info on the medical records request, if there could be some sort of FYI, so that physicians realize this is a clinical trial. This individual says that they spoke to someone from Science 37 who was quite helpful, and so they're hoping that this issue's now been resolved, but just wanted to make you all aware of it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. What avenues are being used to publicize this trial, specifically Science 37, outside of PWSA or FPWR, and the doctors that are directly associated with the trial operations?
The only place, I guess, that you would find not the only place, but where we have our study listed is FPWR, PWSA, the Tempo website itself, and then www.clinicaltrials.gov would have the study.
Okay.
There are also, like Google ads and things that will pop up if you're looking at something that might be PWS related, like you might get a Tempo ad, but it wouldn't necessarily specifically mention Science 37, but when you go to it would take you to our website, and our website has the whole at-home FAQ
Okay.
available.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If you are done with the double blind and beginning open label, can you switch that to the in-home portion?
No, you cannot switch that to the in-home. You have to finish and this is the reason, the efficacy is really important to us. And it's super, super important in the double blind, super important in the 1 year open label extension in that Science 37 at home 314 study, or even, well, for that, we don't have efficacy. So we don't ask you questions about like how the drug is working. We are following you specifically for safety, to get more safety data. And so we want you to stay at your site that you started with so that we can have consistent efficacy data for that whole 11 weeks plus 1 year.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if we should just make sure we clarify. So Science 37 is a site for
For 312.
the primary
And
trial.
yes, what I didn't
And
mention is that Science 37 is the site that runs 314, the open label extension. Yeah, thank you. So that I did not make clear. So Dr. Sarah Trepanier, who is the investigator for 312, she also runs that longer open label extension that happens in the US only after the 1 year period is up.
right. Let's not confuse it. There's a double blind open label extension and then the option to move into the continued open label.
And that's what the community has available to them now for individuals who are looking to participate in the clinical trial as it stands right now. I have some questions that are probably going to confuse some of the other attendees. So we're going to be skipping around back and forth, and I think I'm hoping we can provide some clarity for everyone. We have an individual who's asked a question there that has a loved one that's actually been on pitolisant for 9 years, and this individual was originally part of the importation before it became available in the US. And
Mhm.
so this is an individual who's now been informed that their care has to transition to that virtual model. Um, so I think this is where maybe some of the confusion for community members is, because there's been so many different facets of the trial. This particular individual has been asked to move to the virtual model. Um,
And
but
it's not their care, because their care is always with their actual doctor. Like whoever their doctor is for PWS, they should be continuing their care with that person. Their study investigator it would move from that current study investigator who might be their actual PWS doctor.
that's my understanding is
Yeah, and so
yeah.
they would move into our trial to be followed for safety by our investigator, but our investigator is not a PWS specialist. They should continue to be seen by their doctor.
Which I'm sure that most of our folks will. This individual is curious to know if instead of transitioning to the virtual model, if they would be able to see a doctor in person in their state, since there is a trial, there is a site in their state. So I'm not sure. This it's a little tricky. I'm not sure if you're
Yeah, no,
answer
I get what they're asking, and they can,
that.
for our study, the answer is no. They can only see if they transition from phase one, if they've been on for 9 years, they would be in phase one. So phase one to um, the Science 37-314 study, which is not tempo, we're not talking about that. They would transition to that trial and be seen by Dr. Trepanier for the trial, again, for their care as a person with PWS, not unrelated to the trial. They can see whoever they need to see, but that isn't related to Harmony or the trial.
Would it be safe to say that individuals with questions that specific should contact their trial coordinator and see what they can work out?
Yes, that would be a
Okay.
good.
Folks, I know that some of this can be quite confusing, but that's just because Harmony's been around and completely invested in our PWS world for so long. So just kind of hang in there with us and hang in with
Yeah.
them a little bit longer. We have several more questions, so if it's okay, I'm
Yeah.
just going to start. I'm going to go through them. There's one of the questions says, you may have mentioned this and I may have missed it, but I was wondering how long the Science 37 option would be available.
For I guess it depends on what they're asking for the
I
tempo
imagine
trial.
I imagine that they're asking how long this option would be available for people interested in enrolling in the clinical trial.
For tempo, the 312 site for, and all of the sites, right, will be available until we reach 134 participants in the trial so that we can hopefully get good data, but get whatever data we get and analyze it and see, does the drug work? Is it safe and does it work? And so we will go until we get the 134 participants that we need for the trial. So Science 37 and all the sites will be around until we hit that mark. And then if they're talking about the US additional trial, that would go until we finish enrolling tempo and we analyze the data and we see what the data looks like and we see, what happens with the program.
Okay. I
I
think
hope that answered what they were
I
looking
hope so. If it doesn't, I'm sure that they will get back in the Q&A.
for.
We have, I think this is just a comment, and you all will enjoy this. We've been on open label since January, and I cannot say enough amazing things. For us, this goes beyond sleep. It has just woken up all of her systems. She's excelling at school because she's no longer working against being so tired. So that's really nice to hear from a community member that they've been involved and this is working so well.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm glad to hear that because we sort of sometimes Ann and I we work in a little bit of a vacuum and we don't necessarily hear what's going on with the trial. We're just sort of involved in all this data and logistics, and so that's nice to hear. It's
that's,
encouraging.
and it's not the first time I've heard that. Okay. I'm not sure if you all are able to answer this based on phase 3 data, but maybe for phase 2. Can you give some statistics about the success rate and how long after taking the drug is the average time to see results?
Well, hard to know. It's hard for me to say like let's call it a success rate because the first trial that we did, the phase 2 trial, was a small trial. And it was when you do these trials, you have to put or the trial size is important because in order for a trial to be what we call the result to be a statistically significant result, you have to have a certain number of patients in the trial. And the phase 2 trial is not designed that way. It's designed to just give us kind of a sense or a signal that we're moving in the right direction, but it's hard to say, what that effect is really going to be. Until the phase 3 trial is finished, reviewed, sent to the FDA, all of that, it's hard for us to say, what the success rate really is.
Okay.
Right, like we wouldn't, if we knew that, we wouldn't
Right.
be in the trial.
Yeah, I mean, that's
We
right.
know that we had, so we
Trial.
don't know if it's successful yet.
Right. But the question I think was a good one because,
Yeah.
well, you have some phase 2 data, right? So, but the way the phase 2 is set up, it's not enough
Doesn't
to
prove
give
it.
us the answer.
Right.
And the next part was how long does it take to work? It really, hard to say because everyone's sort of a little individual, but relatively soon we expect start to see improvements if the drug is helpful. I mean, when I say relatively soon, I mean it could be a matter of days, it could be weeks. It really depends on the patient. Sometimes you have to get to the right dose. So the answer is it depends.
So with that, I'm going to
But
do a
having
follow-up.
said this, but Dorothy, let me just say one other thing. It's not the kind of drug. This is not like some people may be familiar with like antidepressants, for example. You take those drugs; they take time to work because there has to be some equilibration in the brain and the chemistry, and that a drug like that could take a month or more sometimes. That's not how this works. This is a little different. It's not the same kind of mechanism of action, but there's still some variability.
I think that was the perfect follow-up for that. Um, okay, great. Uh, can you enter this study if you are currently taking ViCat XR?
Yes, you can
If
as long
we're
as
on
you're
a stable dose.
right. As long as you're on a stable dose.
Okay.
That's the advantage now. When ViCat was part of the trial, the answer was no, we couldn't allow it. But now that it's approved, it's on the market. As long as you're on a stable dose, you can there. We wouldn't expect any drug interactions with pitolisant.
Okay, great. We still have we have a few more questions here, so just kind of bear with me. Okay, my son's been diagnosed with sleep apnea, but the night mask did not seem to make a difference. He definitely has daytime sleepiness. How do you determine whether sleepiness is from PWS or it's from sleep apnea?
Well, yeah, sometimes it's hard. I mean, I think that person's doctor or principal investigator, if they want to be part of the trial, will need to sort of have to try to fetter that out. It's not easy. We would allow a person into the trial even if they have sleep apnea, as long as it's under some sort of control. Now, whether that means a CPAP mask or whether maybe some people might have had some kids might have had their tonsils and adenoids removed, which could have potentially improved the condition. Sometimes weight plays a role. So there are various ways in which, various treatment options available depending on the specifics of what's going on with any given patient. But it is sometimes a little hard to fetter out, but can be done. It can be done. You have to, good clinical history and have to look at all of the potential treatment options. As I said, if the clinician feels that the sleep apnea is under some semblance of control, under reasonable control, and not the main issue in terms of the sleepiness, that person could potentially be allowed in the trial.
Okay.
So it's sort of a case by case basis.
So on that, can you maybe describe why the dose is based on weight rather than age?
Well, we did some analysis where we looked at kind of the pharmacokinetics of the drug, and we believe that you're going to get a better response if there's a certain milligram per kilogram concentration in the blood. And it's hard to determine that based on age, because not everybody, there could be a big discrepancy in like, let's say, a 12-year-old. Some are small, some are big, and so it's not, to go by age may not be, we felt, was not necessarily going to be the appropriate approach. And that's kind of how it's done in pediatrics primarily anyway. It's always right. It's always a weight-based dosing. And we felt because a certain milligram per kilogram concentration should be reached, that was the best way to do it.
Right. Okay, perfect. A couple more questions. I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I appreciate it. Um, can you all let us know what the side effects are of pitolisant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very well tolerated drug overall. It's been on the market for people with narcolepsy for quite some time. Uh, but the main issues are, I would probably say, headaches. Some people have experienced headaches. Some 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 may get some degree of sleep disturbance, which can be potentially controlled. Could be based on timing of the medication. Um, Maybe some nausea, but generally very well tolerated.
Great. Last but not least, at least for now, um, will the nurses that come to the house for Science 37 be trained in PWS, understanding sometimes that there can be hard blood draws and the need for structure around these appointments?
Yes, they will understand the patient population. Definitely, that's Science 37 has, we worked with Science 37 on our Fragile X program. I think they enrolled a very large number of patients and had a lot of good feedback on working with the Fragile X kids, or the kids with Fragile X. And so we expect the same level of understanding of kids who are hard blood draws and, just needing special attention to make the visit pleasant. And I will say, like, we at Harmony are always here, that clinical trials at harmonybiosciences.com, for feedback. Like, we want to hear it so that we can make our studies better and make sure our, study sites know that we're listening to the families.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we do have just, that's not a question, it's another comment, and I think you will both enjoy it. This individual says it's their total opinion. And they would say that it's a safe trial for our community to feel comfortable to start if it's their first trial. It's a great one to tip their toes into. And this person's opinion was one of the most important trials for them to get into. Um, if you're tired and you cannot function, that's when our kids, that's how our kids are daily. So I think it's just another check mark in your direction for helping our community. So thank you so much. I don't see any other questions. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add before we close up tonight?
I think from my perspective, it's just, we are doing this study because we haven't proven that pitolisant, is safe and effective in people with PWS. And so that is why we are doing this study, and we really need to enroll it, which is why we get out here and we want to talk about the study. So, I love hearing that feedback, but from a statistical, scientific, FDA perspective, we need to prove it.
Correct.
And that's the way we prove it is by enrolling this trial. So we appreciate everybody's time for listening to us for an hour and, even considering being in a trial or putting your family member in a trial, because we know that, it's a big deal.
Right. Thank you. And I don't think I could have said that better myself. The entire point of the phase 3 trial is to prove that this drug is safe and effective, and we can't do that unless it's enrolled. So for those of you who have wonderful comments, just make sure that you're talking to your peers out there in the PWS world and encouraging them to get involved if it's something that they're able to do. And of course, if there are any questions, Harmony is available and can answer them. And we're happy to help engage wherever we can.